So, Dan, I'm going to ask you the question. Who's the MVP this year? A'ja Wilson or Napheesa Collier?
I'm biased, but I believe it's A'ja Wilson. And
Mm.
here's why. This is one of those where, like, as a longer term men's basketball fan, I look back to like the year Derrick Rose won the MVP, and I think to myself, that was wonderful from a narrative standpoint, but he was not the best player in the NBA at that point in time.
Mm.
I know I'm going to catch some fire from Phee and Lynx fans when I say this, but when I watch A'ja Wilson play basketball, and I love your guys' conversation about like different forms of dominance and how if one thing is more forceful, sometimes we assert dominance to that more than just like Phee reminds y'all a little bit of how KD used to just rack up 30 points and it'd be like, that was easy.
Way too easy.
The thing with A'ja is just like, y'all, she has it within her that she could have the second highest scoring individual WNBA season of all time this year, behind last year. Now, then you start to like piece together like profile. Here's the thing I want to say for starters. If Napheesa Collier wins the MVP, she will be abundantly deserving. And everyone's got to just like chill out. Like everyone can have an opinion that is based off of what valuable means to them. And I think this is why it's so compelling to talk about, because we get to define what valuable means. And for me, history plays into that. Overall impact plays into that. Value to your team compared to what the value the other person is to their team. So like, and from a history standpoint, like missing 10 games is twice as many games as anyone else has ever missed who would win WNBA MVP. And, you know, if I'm defining my terms as, I think best player plays a lot higher of a role in my evaluation of MVP than it does for some other people. I'll hear best player on best team. Well, I found out, like I did some digging. Only 12 times in the 29-year history of the WNBA has the best player on the team with the best record won the WNBA MVP. And so I started thinking about that. Interesting. And I looked at the Lynx winning percentage, and it's like was 789 a couple of games ago. And that would have been like the 19th best individual season of all time. So I'm asking myself, if a player who is brilliant and dominant like Napheesa Collier has missed more games than any other MVP candidate in history, and the team isn't like undeniably like so dominant that I'm just going to ascribe that as like this is the person pushing them there, I think Asia's argument is just so compelling that it's got to be close. We can't just act like this is Fee's and it's in the bag. So I think it's A'ja because of history and context and what I believe to be valuable. And then I've got like written out on a notepad here, like 10 different major categories where A'ja is in top 5, like points, steals, blocks, rebounds, PER, win shares, offensive win shares, defensive rating. She has no other teammates in the top 20 in defensive rating, and she's third. Phee is first, and she's got 3 other in the top 20. So, like, I start to look at relative to the Aces got talent too now. Like, let's not like be disrespectful, but the Lynx are like loaded, stacked, and I just think that what A'ja does to raise the floor for the Aces is significantly greater than what Phee does for the Lynx, and that is not a dig on Phee. Yeah. That's just to say, I think one person is more impactful and more valuable than the other, in my subjective opinion.
So the reason why my face lit up when you mentioned Derrick Rose in 2011 is because Martin and I yesterday, last night, we were prepping for the show, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to talk about. And I said to Martin, I said, you know, this A'ja thing kind of feels like that, right? I said, you know, it almost kind of feels like Asia's entered, and I've said this before, like Asia's entered the LeBron stretch of her career, right? Where LeBron was always in the MVP conversation. LeBron was always competing for championships. And at some point, some people just got tired of it. Yep. Right? And I had mentioned how Becky Hammon in one of her recent post-game pressers had kind of said, like, the MVP is not based upon the media narrative. Like, the MVP should be based on whoever the most valuable player is, whoever the best player is, whatever. And I said to Martin, I said, yo, like it almost feels like you think about it. And I didn't know this until someone said it, and I'm going to go check it. If A'ja Wilson wins MVP this year or any other time again before her career is over, she'd have 4, and it'd be the most ever. And I think about going back to that 2011 season, how LeBron coming into that year, back to back, right? And he likely could have and probably should have won it for the 3rd year in a row, which would have tied him with Bird for 3 straight, right? And if 12 and 13 is any indication, he would have been the first player to win 5 straight. And in 2011, right, people just didn't want LeBron to have that on his resume because that would have upset or probably jump-started the GOAT debate with him and Michael. Now, I am not by any means saying that there are people out here who would intentionally prevent A'ja Wilson from winning another MVP, because I don't think A'ja Wilson is hated by the women's basketball masses at all. And if she is, it's not nearly as much as how much LeBron was hated and is hated by the basketball masses. But A'ja Wilson, and Sue Bird said this on her podcast, we don't do this with MVP, but like when you look at A'ja Wilson's MVP seasons, every year she won MVP was better than the year before. And like how many times in sports, no matter the sport, no matter the league, how many times can we say a player wins MVP, that's usually the best season of your career, and then you go on to win 2 more, and both of those seasons are better than the ones before, and you have 2 seasons in 2023 when Stewie won it, and now this season where those seasons are also better than the previous year when you won MVP, and there's a chance again this year that she doesn't win the MVP award. Like, I know that MVP is not a year-over-year thing,
Right.
but if she's consistently getting better year over year, my question is, and it was my same question as to why she didn't win Defensive Player of the Year last year. If I'm the MVP last year and I'm better this year or on par with that this year, and the person who's potentially going to win it is at the same level that they were at last year, maybe slightly better, how am I not the MVP again? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the conversation that we have to have with A'ja, where it's almost like another player in the league has to do something has to be equally as historic, if not more historic than A'ja, for the duration of the season, in order for us to look up and say, okay, yeah, it makes sense that that Asia's not going to be the MVP and that this person deserves it. And to your point, Dan, I didn't even know that. Like, I knew that she missed 10 games. I didn't know that there wasn't another player who had even missed half of that many games in a season and won MVP.
The most was 5. Jonquel missed 5 games when she won it in 2021, I think it was. She missed 5 games.
I didn't know that. And like you and I were saying and during that conversation, Martin, we didn't put in the clip, the Lynx didn't miss a beat while Phee was gone.
Yeah, they were 7-3. 7-3 without
Phee. They were 7 like, so it's like, if you're the most valuable player to your team, as I said, and the clip is on our page, there should be a bit of a drop-off, like a noticeable drop-off if you're the MVP. And it doesn't seem like that was the case. I don't know if people will hold that against her. It'll be a tight race, but I agree with you. Like, especially with the way that you laid it out, Dan, I don't know how you look at what Asia's done from top to bottom. Because what do we both say, Martin? All the Aces needed to do was figure it out and start winning games, and Asia's MVP case would be stronger. Because you can't justify A'ja being MVP when the Aces are 500 and the Lynx are first. But the Aces are second now,
right?
And the Lynx are first,
right?
So it's like now, so that's why it's so much more of a conversation. And it's they play tomorrow.
Yeah, and you had said that it may come down to that game that we all need to be watching that game to see what's going on there. That may be very significant to this conversation. I do think the points Dan made were so valid, and I think the value conversation is the best argument to make for A'ja, because if we were to see Vegas without A'ja this year, I'm sure they would have fallen off a cliff. I mean, they struggled with her. They lost by 50 to Minnesota with her.
Yeah.
To that point, I do think that what's going to make it, like I told you, Marcus, I don't envy these voters at all, and I think it's going to be very close, because I think I think that her team turning things around has made her case even stronger. But I do think that if you're considering, like you said, the duration of the season, Marcus, Vegas's slow start, and Asia didn't really have a slow start, but she wasn't playing the way she's been playing these last like 10 to 15 games. She was good to start the season, but Vegas as a whole
post
was
All-Star break, she's been completely different.
Definitely different, more in her dominant form. And pre All-Star break, Vegas as a whole was not really there. She was good, but it just but during that time, I mean, Minnesota got off to a blazing start to the season, and Phee was dominant from day one. Now, her missing the 10 games might end up level, and then during that time, Asia picking things up and Vegas picking things up, it's just made things way too challenging. I think I think there's such a strong case for both or either, and it's gonna be really close. This game tomorrow night, people might really be waiting to see that. And the two of them, obviously, they know what's going on. They know what's at stake. Not to say they're gonna battle it out for MVP, but I mean, a statement could be made. A message might need to be sent.
I think the team that wins that game, that player wins MVP, I think. But even going back to something I said earlier, I just thought about too, is like, do you remember when we were on the show, you and I, Martin, we were talking about how the Liberty had fallen out of that, they like just started falling apart without John Quell. And I said to you, kind of joke, I was like, yo, bro, I don't know if you can make an MVP case without playing basketball games. John Quell Jones making a really strong MVP case because they were like undefeated with her. And then they just completely fell apart without her. And to your point about Asia, I think it's the same way. If you take Asia Wilson off of the Las Vegas Aces for 10 games,
they're crumbling.
They're done. They're not even,
they're going to compete in some. They've got Chelsea Gray.
They're going to be competitive, but they're not going to go 7-3 the way that the Lynx did. Yeah. And again, I know that playing the if game is a very, very dangerous game. But and again, and I say this I talk football all the time. You know this, Martin. I say this with Jalen Hurts all the time, right? It is not Napheesa Collier's fault that the front office in Minnesota did a good job of building that team. I don't want to make it seem that is what I'm saying. It's not. They get paid to build a championship contending basketball team. Napheesa Collier gets played to be the best she can be to win a championship. I got that. But what I am saying is, if we're talking who's more valuable to their team, if you take Asia Wilson off the Aces, where are they?
Now, so I think we are starting to see Vegas might have a championship something to them. Now they're playing like they could be championship basketball. I think we can clearly say, but again, that's still a question mark. Like, we're just now seeing Vegas come into form, and now we're starting to think, okay, can this version win a title? Minnesota with Phee is a championship. By the numbers, they're like an historically great team.
Yes.
With Phee. Without Phee, yes, they went 7-3, and that's good. But guess what? It's only good, and they'd only be good without Phee. I don't think any of us would think they'd actually win the title without Phee.
But
so if we're talking, so I agree that like the drop off of Vegas with Asia and without Asia is probably deeper than Minnesota of Phee, and it's probably a deeper drop off. I'll give you that. But at the same time, if we're talking value, Phee is what makes them a championship team.
Yeah.
And all their parts do too. It's the sum of their parts. But like, if I take away, Courtney Williams, they might still be able to do it. Nothing against Courtney Williams, because all of them are essential to that team. But you know what? Phee is the one that makes them different, unguardable, mismatch problem. They're still good without her, but they're not historically great and not championship without her. So that's where her value still has credibility.
I think with Fee's case, aside from like the games missed, like if she'd been playing that whole stretch, even with the Aces ascension, I think it'd be disrespectful for me to act like it was as close of a race as it is to me right now.
I agree.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
But if I've got, and this is where I just think it's helpful when you're having these conversations to be clear about your biases, because if I believe Asia is as great as she is and has displayed that statistically, I feel like, and this is where like the LeBron conversation earlier comes into play, I feel like it better be really clear that someone is significantly more valuable for me to go over to that person. And that's when, like, I cannot tell you how many hours I've spent in the weeds looking at their advanced stats, looking at their on-off numbers, looking at, like, I've done videos. I didn't post the Phee one because I didn't want haters to take it and run with it. But their most recent game against the Wings, I isolated every contested shot where Napheesa Collier was the defender. And I've just done that for the Aces' most recent game against Dream. They were effectively 1 for 12 against shots that Asia contested in the Dream.
You put that, yeah.
It was insane. And then I'm looking at, like, the Wings, right? And the Lynx still won by 24. So, like, let's not act like they're playing terribly. But it was like, I want to say 6 for 11 was what Phee had done against the Wings. And so, like, I want to do this more longitudinally and look at, like, back further into the season. But I just, and you call it confirmation bias you want, but every time I do analytic observation beyond the eye test, I'm just like, whoa, like Asia better than she was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
The last thing I'll say on it before you move on to our impact playoff performers is this, and I said this to Martin leading into last season when we were talking about Asia potentially going back-to-back MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. If you look at what Asia has done defensively as well, Asia's been the best defensive player in basketball these past couple seasons as well. Obviously, Napheesa Collier won D-Point last year, which Aces fan or not, I don't think she should have won Defensive Player of the Year last year. But the one argument that I've always made to kind of put a button on what you just said, Dan, going back to your most valuable thing is, if A'ja Wilson's consistently the best offensive and defensive player in basketball, and it's clear that she's the best offensive and defensive player in basketball, then again, what's the justification for looking at someone else and saying they're the MVP or even Defensive Player of the Year over her if they're not, at the very least, matching what she's doing?
Well, she is matching in some ways, though. I mean, like,
no, I'm not saying she's not. I'm not saying she's not. But what I'm saying is, I think that's what the conversation has to come down to: is where the gaps are. One, who does the gap favor? And two, how wide is that gap? Like, that's what it has to be. Because Asia doesn't miss basketball games. Like, when she hurt her wrist, it was a big deal. It was her first missed game in forever. Like, she's always available. So if you're always available and you're always playing at this level, where are the gaps? And if those gaps do exist, how wide is the gap and who does it favor? That's what it has to come down to. In most instances that I've seen, individually, statistics-wise, most of those gaps have shrunk a lot. One, because Phee missed time, and two, just because Asia averaged 25.5 points last month, one player of the month, including a 30-20 game, right? And two, in the instances where Phee does have the edge, it's not as massive of a gap in the places where Asia has the edge. And I think that's what that's like, eventually, that's just what it has to be. Who has the lead? Where are the gaps? Who do the gaps favor?